Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Hello, and welcome to a special edition show, Farewell to Bilbo Baggins, a tribute to Sir Ian Holm. Tonight, we'll be honouring and celebrating the life and work of Sir Ian Holm, star of so many famous movies, from Alien to Time Bandits, Chariots of Fire to Brazil, Henry V, Hamlet, The Fifth Element, and of course, The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, to name but a few of his 137 TV and movie appearances, memorable performances that have enriched our lives. Sir Ian Holm Cuthbert, born in 1931, passed away on Friday, June 19, at the age of 88, peacefully at hospital with his family. He has been described as one of the giants of theatre by the Royal Shakespeare Company, and the director Peter Jackson paid a heartfelt tribute to the actor, saying, "Farewell, dear Bilbo." And to quote the character of Bilbo himself, his last words in The Return of the King are simply, "I think I'm quite ready for another adventure." And so tonight, we'll be celebrating and sharing our favourite moments, characters, and performances from the movies in which Sir Ian Holm starred. Joining me this evening is the comic artist and expert on all things pop culture, Elrodimus Flash. And of course, we're joined by our fantastic fans of this channel, some of which are already in the chat, such as Cosmetti and Sadie Bella. Hello, Cosmetti and Sadie. And welcome to all those who will join us later on by watching this video recorded. So first of all, good evening, Flash. Before we start going into some depth about Sir Ian Holm's performances, are there any that particularly stand out to you?
Probably Greystoke and Alien, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the role of Ash in Alien was probably the role where most American audiences have seen him first, because I think before then he wasn't really famous to the American scene. He was mainly an English stage actor, but the role of Ash, one of those roles that for me really showed the fact that he drew upon, I think he was in his 40s by that stage, late 40s. He drew upon all of his classical training to give a performance of a robot, which gives this idea of complete lack of compassion, this otherness, which was a totally different idea from like science fiction robots before that, which were all sort of caring in some way. And I think all of the later movies, like thinking of another Ridley Scott movie which had simulants in it, Blade Runner, with the same idea that these creations, these simulated people, don't have the humanity that humans do. And it's interesting because I think we were talking before the show about all the other characters that Ian Holm played had that humanity built in, whereas the character that sort of made him famous, this android, just has no humanity at all. Any thoughts on that at all? Or?
No, it's true. That's something I've never thought of, because like when I think of him, I always think of probably like Greystoke, where he's very much the father figure, like adopted father. Then of course he plays an actual father in Fifth Element, which probably everybody knows him from. And yeah, you forget that Alien, he's completely creepy and cold.
Yeah, and I mean, it's
like a house cat. You want to trust him, but there's nothing in those eyes.
There's three monsters in the movie. In a way, you could consider the house cat as like ferocious in its own way, because it goes back to instinct. The cat, and the cat doesn't get eaten by the alien. That's a famous scene where the alien catches up with the cat in the carry case, and it doesn't eat the cat or kill it, because it sort of sees a kindred spirit in that this cat is just surviving, and it's just instinct, and the alien is just instinct. But maybe the real monster in the movie is actually Ash.
Yeah, he is. I mean, he's the reason the alien is on the ship.
And
it's the 70s. The villain was the man.
Yeah.
The corporations, the government.
Yeah. And he's sort of like the ultimate form of corporate control. And maybe that sort of like is a prophecy of where we are right now with, the way technology is being used by corporations to control people. So maybe that was like a prophecy of that, because he's like a living incarnate version of technology, corporate control through technology, because he's there to sell them all out, to bring back this alien for profit. So it's an interesting take, and I just think it's probably the one performance that sticks out from the others for that reason. But there you go. So moving on, and this is a movie that we did a few weeks back on this channel. I'm sorry, Flash, you weren't there for this one, and I really apologize about that. But if we ever do this again, I'll include you in it. But that was Time Bandits. Ian Holm, I think it was 48 or 49 when he played the role of Napoleon, and he actually was Stanley Kubrick's first choice to play him in a biopic that they didn't end up making. But he also, as you were saying before the show, he appeared as as Napoleon in The Emperor's New Clothes from 2001. And he was also in another film, Napoleon and Love, in 74. We were talking about why don't we all have different versions of Napoleon? It's like he almost became like stuck in that part, didn't he? Because so many times he was cast as Napoleon. But
it's the price of being short as an actor.
Yeah, and was
Napoleon get the short guy?
Or was he actually 6 foot tall? Well, the winner's right history, though. Yeah. But no, I mean the way he played it, he was so deadpan in the way that he did the scene where he's talking about all of the rulers in history who were really, really short, that it was so funny that that Terry Gilliam had to leave the room. He was in fits of laughter, and they couldn't record the scene because you would hear Terry Gilliam laughing over the camera all the time. But that was, I think, like you were saying about the human side of his acting, he was able to bring a real sense of the everyman struggling against everything, and even able to make Napoleon like an everyman, who was struggling against all the odds to be successful. Interestingly, with that movie as well, the actors who were in that movie, there was a bunch of them. Similar cast who were in a lot of movies at that time. Michael Palin, Catherine Hellman, Peter Vaughan, Jim Broadbent. They were also with Ian in Brazil a couple of years later. But a really good performance from Ian in that movie. It wasn't very long. I think it's only in the film are about 10 minutes.
A few minutes, not long at all, right?
But he really leaves an impact. And
everyone does, and that's the great thing about Time Bandits is everybody feels like they're in the whole movie. Yeah, like John Cleese is Robin Hood.
Yeah,
who's like 5 minutes of screen time and gone.
Yeah.
If that.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of them, they just show up, they make an impression and leave. And I think Connery's probably in there the longest. Yeah, and because he reappears at the end, so therefore he's the one that really sticks. But they all feel like they're all through the entire movie. Yeah. We've got Sadie Bella in the chat as well. Hello, Sadie Bella. Pleased to see you there. But yeah, I mean the overriding feeling in that movie is that they all give fantastic performances because they're all playing historical characters. So I think they really grabbed the roles, and certainly
Ian Holm played Napoleon, like what is he? And I was came to Italy because I think they're small. I was told they're really tiny guys. So he's playing it like, some sort of idiot, completely obsessed with height. It's just by luck or by chance getting where he wants to go. But it was such a good performance. It proves that he could do comedy anyway.
Yeah.
But I mean, moving on from there, the next movie he did, which was, I mean, we're not picking out all of them because there's so many, but the next big movie that he did, I mean, Time Bandits was probably around the same time as the next one, but Time Bandits 1981, but Chariots of Fire was also 1981, and Chariots of Fire, an amazing, I mean, back in the day when, there was still a British film industry to speak of, really good rendition of the story of well, first of all, Eric Liddell and also Harold Abrams, who devout Christian who didn't want to run on a Sunday, and also Harold Abrams, who was a Jew who ran despite the prejudice at the time. So they were running to overcome prejudice and making that impression. It was a huge breakthrough historically, and a fantastic story. And Ian Holm plays Sam Musabini, who's Eric Liddell's trainer. But he appeared in that movie actually with Sir John Gielgud was in that as well, and both of those were in Greystoke. So I mean, all through the early 80s, you have the same troupe of actors trained at RADA, and they've gone through the RSC.
And your favorite composer is Blade Runner and Chariots of Fire. Yeah,
I mean the soundtrack from that movie by Vangelis, unbelievable. Which, like you say, Vangelis also did the soundtrack for Blade Runner, and those two tracks are just
cigar smoking Master of the Sin.
Yeah, and they are phenomenal. I mean, those two movies at a similar time, come from a period where there was a lot of effort put into making it as good as possible. I mean, tremendous cinematography in both movies. I think Hugh Hudson directed Chariots of Fire, but I mean, the part of Sam in that movie, who's sort of like, it's a bit like the relationship in Rocky, isn't it? Rocky's got his trainer and he's pushing him as far as he'll go. But the dynamic in this movie is that Sam Musabini, the character of Sam Musabini, is coming into this situation at a time when it was considered to be unsightly to play the tradesman, as it were, by employing professional coaches, because there was a lot of bias and a lot of what you would call upper class stupidity in Britain at the time, which even the First World War hadn't knocked out completely. There were still massive class divisions and things like that. So I think that if anybody wants to watch Chariots of Fire and Ian Holm's performance in that, you'll be glad to watch it. It's probably one of the finest movies ever made, in my opinion, anyway. But moving swiftly along, the next one we're going to is one of your favorites, actually, Flash. Greystoke, The Legend of Tarzan, Lord of the Apes. He plays the
Belgian.
Yeah, Captain Philippe Darnaud.
Yeah, the added character that they added for the movie.
But what do you think of that added character? Because you love this film, don't you?
I like it. It works. I mean, I love the book because that's probably around the same time I started reading the book for the first time. But the book is all over the place. It's good. I mean, it reads like you're reading a true story in some parts. But the Tarzan and Jane. She lives in Wisconsin, and Tarzan goes to Wisconsin at some point. So yeah, it's literally all over the place. Like
they had him go to England, and this is where Sir John Gielgud pops up.
They kind of fixed it. It's like where Lord of the Rings did, where it's like, let's get it down to the bare bones of the story itself.
Yeah.
And he's the character you needed because, I mean, half of the movie Tarzan literally is an ape. So you needed a human to do the talking and give a reason for the ape to learn how to speak English and French and walk like a man.
Walk like a man, yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the, I mean, not only does he, obviously he's an actor in the movie, but he also narrates it. Because it's like they're trying to make it like his journal.
Well, that's, I think, the first time Tarzan, they added in the latest one they did too, where they added in actual history. Because isn't he a Franco-Belgian soldier?
Yeah.
So that would put it in the Congo during a horrible time.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, the realism that they tried to bring in this version was unique, really. I think it stuck out straight away compared to compared to the standard stuff. There's nothing
compared to before, where casting involved. Let's get a guy who can swim.
Yeah, that's just exactly.
Did he win a medal in the Olympics for swimming? He's hired. Is he presentable?
Yeah, I mean, the I think we mentioned before about the one thread that I think does run through all of Ian Holm's work is this sort of nervousness and this sort of cautiousness and like the everyman who realizes how dangerous the world is and how it's all about survival. And again, this character of Captain Philippe Darnaud is the way he portrays it is somebody who recognizes. I mean, it's a film about survival, isn't it? Tarzan is a survival story in itself, and I think everything Ian Holm did was about somebody who was on the edge of survival, he's not just trying to look out for himself in this movie. He's trying to look out for Tarzan or Lord Greystoke in this movie. So I enjoyed it. I mean, it's got Christopher Lambert, who's famous for Highlander, who plays Tarzan, or John Cleese.
Yeah, and think what a risk that was, since he spoke no English.
But that's one of the lines, isn't it? In the quotes, it's he says, "I sense we had a long and difficult journey ahead of us. I will teach John some rudimentary manners and a greater understanding of the language." And it's ironic because he's playing a Belgian, and I think is Christopher Lambert Belgian or French? He's French, isn't he?
He's French. He's everything. He's like French, American, something.
That's right. Yeah. Is he one of these people who like moved around a lot? I'm military fan.
Yeah, I think he was born in one country, grew up in another.
Yeah, so he's been around. So I mean that movie was 1984, and then a year later we have in 1985, which I mean I think Terry Gilliam had planned for this to come out in 1984, but he was too late. 1985 we have Brazil. Yeah,
if not 1983 even, because I know it took him years to get it released.
Yeah, and he's famous for saying that it was his version of 1984, but before he could actually get it produced, the guy who produced the actual version of 1984 brought that out, and I can't remember the quote. I think he was extremely angered by that because he was pipped at the post. So, but yeah, it's Terry Gilliam's version of 1984,
and that's from the time when Hollywood would get these auteur directors like Gilliam or Ridley Scott and give them, "Oh, do whatever you want," and they're like, "Yeah, we really don't like this," and it would take years to get a movie released.
Yeah.
Because of all the cuts, like Blade Runner took forever, and it's like 20 different versions of it. In Brazil's the same way. It has like how many different endings?
It has, yeah, and this is why it took them longer to make it, because there's all sorts of obviously popular. It's a cult classic now, huge, and people are people in the know will refer to Form 27B/6 or -6/6, which that's actually a reference to George Orwell, who lived at 27B floor 6 when he was writing 1984. So that's where that reference comes from. But yeah, he basically referred to the movie as 1984 and a half. It was not a spoof version. So it was a half to do with 1984 and half to do with Federico Fellini's 8.5 movie. But he was angered and he was pipped to the post. But Ian Holm again plays this character who's sort of filled with nervous energy. But in this movie, he's definitely a coward, because we'll talk about Henry V in a minute, which is a very different character. But in this movie, he plays Mr. Kurtzman, who's the office manager in the Department of Truth, I think it is, and he's a man who Ministry of Information. Sorry, he's a man who just passes on everything to his staff as quickly as he possibly can, because he doesn't want to be led away by the Secret Service and never seen again. And it's the idea, if you've ever worked in an office, things are landing on your desk all the time and all this obscure paperwork, and it's got to be gone by the end of the day, so you've just got to get rid of it.
and there's always someone else to hand it off to.
Isn't there a scene where he tries to push something down the side of the radiator or something? I'm not sure, but he portrays this panic-stricken character, and he gets it so right. It's the idea of just, and this guy is actually going to his subordinate to help him, because he just can't handle it. So he goes to Jonathan Pryce, his character of Sam, and asks him for help. What do I do here? What do I do there? Because he can't cope. So Jonathan Pryce's character takes on all the responsibility. He ends up getting into trouble for it. But I mean, he portrays the perfect coward in that movie.
Well, I've never even thought of it before today, but I'm like, he's kind of the British version of Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah.
He stammers like nobody's business. He plays nervous better than anybody. He plays humanity and heart better than anybody.
Yeah, that's a really good observation. And obviously nowhere near as tall as Jimmy Stewart. But yeah, that's really... So maybe if Ian had enough time, he could have done another version of Is it a Wonderful Life? Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he could have done a better version, a worse version, an English version, a different version.
Commit suicide in Thames. Yeah.
Yeah. It could have been like a British version. I don't think it would have been better. I mean, It's a Wonderful Life's like, it's a one-off, isn't it?
I don't think they would make a movie that dark again.
No, it was. I don't think they would dare. It would charge too many people with.
It's a movie like it's like Willy Wonka. You only think of the chocolate factory on. You don't think of the first half of the movie. That's all very dark and grim and sad.
I don't think you could make.
It's a Wonderful Life. It's like that. You never think of the first half. You don't think of the movie before he jumps in the river.
Yeah, that's an interesting movie. Really, really, that's a good analysis there. And strangely, Ian Holm wasn't in that one. I don't know why, but maybe he was busy that day. Cosmetti says Brazil is brilliant. I agree, Cosmetti. It is one of the best movies ever made. That's undoubtedly the case. It's one of Terry Gilliam's trilogy or triptych of fantasy. The triptych of fantasy is Time Bandits, Brazil, and The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. So
Munchausen's probably the least remembered, even though it's amazing.
It's a marvelous. It really sucks you into the fantasy world.
Yeah.
It's a real homage to early cinema as well. That one.
Well, I mean, it's as close as you'll ever get to like being inside of an oil painting.
Yeah,
because that's how the whole movie feels like you're actually seeing an oil painting move. It's unreal.
Yeah. So, well, so we've talked about Brazil. I mean, Brazil was 1985. 4 years after 1989, we've got Henry V, which is the famous Kenneth Branagh production, which I think really brought home, because I don't think there was many historically accurate portrayals of that period. I know it's Shakespeare; it's not specifically accurate history. It's Shakespeare's play of Henry V, but the effort that went into the accuracy in that, I think that really changed the genre. Because before Henry V, I think there wasn't many. There were some, but there weren't many sort of real gritty, accurate portrayals of that period. And
no. Well, even Shakespeare, you didn't get a lot of gritty, real world feeling either. Well, it's Shakespeare is easily handled as fantasy.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And
Except for Romeo and Juliet, one from the 70s was very historically accurate to period and place.
And I think the previous version of Henry V with Laurence Olivier was very clean looking, wasn't it? It was very
very staged looking. Yeah,
but
didn't have the mud and the rain and
yeah. Whereas the Battle of Agincourt was I think, I mean, some people might disagree, but I think it was quite accurately done, as it would have been on the day. Not that I was there and I can compare it, but the cast as well. I mean, the not just obviously Ian Holm, but obviously Kenneth Branagh as well. Brian Blessed.
First film.
Brian Blessed is in there as well.
Blessed.
Robbie Coltrane, Judi Dench, Alec McCown, Emma Thompson obviously plays the love interest, Paul Schofield, and there's a young Christian Bale in the supporting role.
That's right.
It's the boy in the baggage train. So Christian Bale's in that movie.
St. Crispin's Day.
yeah. We happy few, we band of brothers. Once got the breach to that one play,
and that's probably one of my all-time favorite movie soundtracks is Henry V. Oh my goodness!
But so Ian Holm plays in the cast. For anybody who might not know, plays Captain Fluellen, who's a Welshman, and that's a pretty important thread in the story, because the hidden in the background is King Henry V's previous life, which is misspent youth of drinking and gambling and carousing and all that, and Captain Fluellen brings him back to who he needs to be a king, and reminds him of Edward the Black Prince, and reminds him of his duty, because obviously he used to be the Prince of Wales before he became king, and Fluellen really sort of brings him back to a point where he's like a mentor, a real mentor figure, to teach him how to be a king again. And this is all going on during the campaign in France. And Ian Holm actually manages to do quite a convincing Welsh accent as well, I think. But if anybody hasn't seen that movie, I mean, it's so famous, but I mean, if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to watch it, because it's one of the great.
Just YouTube the speech.
Yeah, and
I'm sure it's on there.
Yeah, I mean, I know this. There was loads of movie versions of Shakespeare plays done before this, and some marvelous ones. But it sort of ushered in a renaissance for it, because it got a bit quiet, and this is towards the end of the 80s, and afterwards, straight afterwards, moving on to the next movie, which was just a year later, was Mel Gibson's Hamlet, which exactly the same vein again, where his version of Hamlet is still really good. I mean, it was him saying, you know, I can do Shakespeare, and he does really well, I think. And again, his go-to straight away for the nervous everyman character was Ian Holm, who plays Polonius. Have you seen? I mean, you must have seen Mel Gibson's Hamlet.
Yeah, that was one of the ones we had to watch in school.
So, do you remember Ian Holm's performance in that one?
Barely. I barely remember the movie. I remember the poster. I don't know why, but
yeah. Well, Helena Bonham Carter.
It was at a bad time. I think if it was made now, it would get a lot of attention, like positive attention.
Yeah,
because Mel Gibson was in it, it got bad attention because he was just the Lethal Weapon guy, Mad Max guy.
I think that's what he was trying to change, wasn't he? He was trying to change his image and sort of say, well, look, you know, I'm not just explosions and big guns. I can act, but yeah, I'm not sure whether. I think overall, it does work when you go back and watch it later on, but it's maybe him trying to compete with Kenneth Branagh in a way.
Well, I mean, that was Hollywood trying to compete with this tiny little low-budget movie.
Yeah,
you know, that was like independent movie that came out and took over the world in '89.
Well, what about
it got attention in the year of Batman?
Did you? I mean, did you see the Kenneth Branagh Much Ado About Nothing?
No, I never have seen the whole thing of that.
Yeah, that actually came out after this '93, so that was 3 years later, and that scooped up a lot of interest, and of course, famous for having.
But he was all the rage in '89 because it was like, I think the critics loved it because they're like, oh, you know, we're sick of Batman.
Yeah,
this is the opposite of Batman, and we love it because of that.
There was a lot of what was it, Cool Britannia, as it was called in the day.
Yeah,
Cool
but it was
Britannia around that
definitely
era.
'89 was the year of the Batman.
Yeah, so you got Keanu Reeves in that one, and
oh, that's right. Denzel Washington.
One of the best actors in it, that was Denzel. I mean, Denzel's, you know, I really do rate him as an excellent actor. But you know, that was something that came out. But yeah, I mean, Hamlet didn't really get the attention that it should have got. But again,
I think if Gibson had directed it in hindsight, it probably would have been great.
Possibly, Franco Zeffirelli directed it, didn't he? But yeah, I mean, Glenn Close was in it as well. Alan Bates, fantastic actor. But yeah, so Ian Holm plays Polonius, and he's killed from behind a curtain, isn't he? At one stage, he hates Hamlet, and I think he really brings that across in his performance. He put 101% in as usual, and you can't go wrong because he was the real deal. He was an RSC, Royal Shakespeare Company actor. He knew this back to front, and you can't fault his performance in that. But yeah, I mean that proved that he was big enough to be asked to come straight away, come and do this part. Mel just like, I want him for that part. But moving on from that, you talk about the popularity of British film at the time. Another movie which came out during the same sort of period, 4 years later, 1994, was The Madness of King George. And in that movie, he plays, I mean, Madness of King George, it was originally The Madness of King George III, because it was George III who was nuts. You all know King George over there. King George III. Something to do with war and, you know, some constitution and things like that. So,
he can keep his tea. We got coffee.
But I think it's an urban myth that the movie was originally titled The Madness of King George III because somebody said if we title it like that, people are going to ask what happened to part 2 and part 1.
Yeah, so, where's part 1?
Where's part 1 and part 2?
This is like Leonard part 6. There's only one.
Like, what happened?
It's a fraud.
Is this like Star Wars? as the prequels. But no, that's seriously though. I mean, that's just an urban myth. I don't think that was. I'm not sure. I'll have to look into that more. But yeah, I mean, we all know King George III was nuts, and it was some sort of illness from inbreeding or something, I think. But Ian Holm plays Dr. Willis, and I remember watching this movie, and I really enjoyed it. But Dr. Willis is like his main way of diagnosing if the patient's getting better is on the quality of the stool. And he becomes the most powerful. The character he plays, he's like a Puritan clergy doctor, and he becomes the most powerful person in the country temporarily because he has authority over the king. I mean, we had Parliament by this stage, anyways. But you know, he has total authority over the king, and one of the quotes is, "If the king refuses food, he'll be restrained. If he claims to have no appetite, he'll be restrained. If he swears and indulges in meaningless discourse, he'll be restrained. If he throws off his bedclothes, tears away his bandages, scratches his sores, and if he does not strive every day and always towards his own recovery, then he must be restrained." George III says, "I am the King of England," and he says, "No, sir, you are the patient." So, a fantastic movie if anybody wants to watch that, and it justifies the Revolutionary War, really, because he was nuts, and
it justifies breeding outside of your family.
Yeah, it does. Like, it's sort of like, should we not just sort of like date our cousins every generation? The blue blood disease. Yeah, there was
the
also
breeded dogs always have horrible genetic conditions.
Yeah, really rare genetic conditions which come about because you're essentially reducing the gene pool every time you do it.
Yeah,
rather than increasing. But I mean, the part played by Dr. Willis is again a man who's determined to survive, but in this sense, he's not out on a limb. He is extreme and lacks a lot of emotion. Perhaps in a way, maybe Ian Holm was playing it a little bit like he played Ash in Alien, where it's a man who just has total authority and determined to do what he wants to do. And
like a Puritan, the Puritans were all about restraining from emotion.
Exactly, and that sort of really comes across in the way he plays the character, because it's all about denial of temptation, denial of pleasures and things like this, because the royalty, the Georgians were well known to be absolutely morally debased. And that's why they were replaced in the end by the Windsors, who were not really very different. Because they're all of Blackadder. Yeah, they just brought fresh blood in, really. I mean, I say replaced. They're all descendants of the Georgians. In a sense, they've just brought in fresh blood. But yeah, and
not as blue.
But yeah, the character of Dr. Willis, and a lot of, I don't know whether this isn't one of those roles where a lot of people know about. As far as Ian Holm's concerned, I'm not sure that many people are familiar with it.
No, because a crazy guy gets all the attention in crazy guy movies.
That's true. Yeah,
that's the Oscar bait thing, is the crazy guy. Yeah. No one pays attention to the subdued person beside him.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, the to play a part where you have to treat the monarch as a lunatic, but he still has to be respected because he's still the monarch. An interesting part to play, and one that Ian did very, very well. Next, we come to a very different genre, is science fiction. I mean, Brazil sort of touches on science fiction in a way, and so does Alien, definitely. But a few years later, The Fifth Element which is 97. He goes back into the science fiction genre and plays Cornelius. And this, when I first saw this movie, I was blown away by it. I loved it because it gave a really fresh perspective on sci-fi movies. It wasn't Blade Runner. It wasn't anything else. It was more of I don't know, larger than life science fiction that was sort of believable as well in a sort of comedic kind of way. And it's one of your favorite movies, isn't it, Flash?
Oh, I watch it. It's like the one I can watch anytime.
Yeah.
I could watch it on a loop and not get tired of it.
And Priest Vito Cornelius, what do you think about the character of Priest Vito Cornelius?
He's the heart of the movie. He's the hero of the movie.
Yeah. It's like the awkward academic who's like completely out of place.
Well, he's like the mad prophet. He's the John the Baptist who suddenly the Messiah has come.
Yeah.
And all the things he's been telling everybody about forever, it's like, oh, it's true now. Now no one wants to listen.
And he's like been waiting so long. He's awkward again about what do I do, what do I say in front of this person, and
when she shows up at his apartment, he's just totally like starstruck and flustered that he's meeting the chosen one. Just so perfect. And then he handles the president of the world like, nothing.
Yeah. It's but I mean it's probably a role where the nervous energy comes into it, and the ability to switch on and switch off emotions, because like you say, he's not interested in anybody else. But as soon as his purpose comes along, he's completely fascinated and obsessed by it. I think that's another thing that he portrayed quite well, the idea of obsession, and single-minded as well. They all had one specific focus as characters. None of them sort of dallied around from one thing to another. But a fantastic performance, and the way he plays the character, from what I remember, is he's a fish out of water. He's completely anachronistic in that time period, but he knows how to cope with everything that's going on, and and again, it's a really comedic role. I think this is something people don't realize about Ian Holm.
It took 10 years for people to realize it was a comedy, and love it.
Yeah, it's a comedy. It's a satire, and it's a very clever movie, really.
Yeah, when it came out, no one knew what to make of it. I did, because I grew up on French comic books, and it's just a French comic book come to life.
I was just about to say as well, your favorite artist.
It was a designer, co-designer on that movie, on everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can tell, can't you?
Jean Giraud. Yeah, he was. Yeah. It was him and one other. His name escapes me, but he's another famous French comic artist, and they were the two that designed pretty much everything. Yeah. Except for some of the clothes, the everyday clothing was Jean-Paul Gaultier, fashion designer. He did the daily clothing, and then all the uniforms and stuff were Mobius. Yeah, the police Mobius uniform, it's very obvious.
You can really tell. I mean, it's as a piece of art, as a piece of cinema art, it's great to see Mobius's stuff really on film. Given the flesh of reality.
Well, and given credit, because he didn't get any credit for Star Wars, which was all stolen from his stuff.
Yeah, true. That's it. I mean, there was a lot of stuff there, but yeah, I mean, for people who haven't seen Ian Holm's performance in The Fifth Element, you're right. I hadn't considered that. He's like the bedrock of the whole story, because all the events are happening around him, and he's always at the center of them.
And he's the guy that knows everything.
Yeah, he's the one that's been keeper of the knowledge for goodness knows how long. So yeah. Now finally, I think we come to that movie was in 1997. So 4 years later, we get Lord of the Rings first movie was The Fellowship of the Ring. And, well, what can we say about this? I mean, one of the interesting things about the character of Bilbo was that, and I think you're aware of this as well, that the reason, and I was so glad when Ian Holm was chosen for the role of Bilbo, because when I was a nipper, there was a radio play on BBC Radio 2, which was their radio play version of The Lord of the Rings, and Ian Holm was in that, and he played Frodo in that. So when he was chosen for Bilbo, I thought that was like a natural choice. You know, and I think that was probably, the role he was probably headed for eventually.
He was born to play it.
Absolutely.
I remember probably, I don't know, months before the movie came out, you know, they put out like books and things that showed pictures from it. And one of the first pictures that I saw of any of the characters was him dressed as Bilbo, and it was like, yep, that's Bilbo Baggins. That's my mind's eye. That's the perfect actor.
Yeah, I don't think
that's the only actor I would have ever thought of to be that part.
And all of the talent and all of the different elements of what we've been talking about came together in that role for Bilbo, for Ian Holm as Bilbo. The nervous energy, the survivor, the person, you know, the heart, the humanity, and also
I don't know if it was there, but in America, like as far as The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, it was the Rankin Bass cartoon.
Yeah,
was played on television all the time. So everybody in America grew up with the Orson Beans Bilbo, and it's like exactly Ian Holm.
Yeah, that's right. And it's the performance is absolutely perfect, and he's got that. You know, we talked about the heartfelt side of the character, but also that other thing that he can do where he just switches off his emotions. And you've got that dichotomy with Bilbo, because you've got the heart of Bilbo Baggins, then you've got where the times where the ring takes him over and he becomes completely selfish. Yeah. He's maybe not emotionless, but he's completely cut off and selfish. So you've got that both elements of what he can do. I just think he drew on everything he had for that role.
Well, who else? Like, it's one of those few actors that can be on screen for a minute and you know everything about the character.
This is it. I mean,
because when you look at Lord of the Rings, people can go into that completely blind without ever seeing cartoons or the books or, you know, audio plays, anything, and you know everything about him.
Yeah, and he did really do nuance really well, didn't he?
Yeah, the jump scare scene that became a meme later.
Oh yeah,
when he sees the ring and attacks Frodo.
Yeah,
and,
that's a meme.
Like, you understand it. Like, it. You shouldn't understand it because it seems like there's not enough emphasis on that, but you know everything you need to know.
Well, the famous witty scene where he's at the party and he finishes off his speech by saying, "I don't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve." And they're going, "What did he just say?"
Poof, I'm gone.
And that was it. Goodbye. And he's away. But yeah, it's probably the role he'll always be best remembered for. Really, I think that's set in culture now forever. I don't think that's ever going to change.
I mean, there's a whole nother generation who's grown up on those movies. I'm sure, and will, you know, forever.
Yeah, and I mean, some of the scenes, like you were saying, some of the scenes are just ripped completely from the cartoon version. Like, you know, if you look at the direction of but I like that because I think Peter Jackson loved that animated movie as well. And
there was a lot they couldn't do because of the cartoon, right? Like a lot of the was it the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings? It was
the Bakshi I'm thinking of. And
they had to change. They changed a ton of stuff because it was already in that one, and they couldn't. You know, legally they weren't allowed to match it.
Yeah. Well, there's plenty still there which are rips from the Bakshi, but
Like the way they introduced Legolas is different because in the
that was
back
completely
version it
changed.
matches the book, but they had to change it because it's like, well, it was done before and we'll get sued for copying it or whatever, blah blah blah.
Yeah, exactly. But the other line that he does as well, which in the book, I'm not sure whether people remembered it, but when he performed it on the movie in the trilogy, it's another line that really sticks with people. I'm old, Gandalf. I know I don't look it, but I'm beginning to feel it in my heart. I feel thin, sort of stretched, like butter scraped over too much bread. I need a holiday, a very long holiday, and I don't expect I shall return. In fact, I mean not to. But that line of "I feel thin, sort of stretched like butter scraped over too much bread," and I know it's not his words, but the way he performs it, it's perfect. So, and of course, he reprised his role as Bilbo Baggins for the Hobbit movie. We were talking about that earlier, where he actually didn't go to New Zealand. All of these scenes were filmed in England, because by this stage, the Parkinson's disease was well developed and he couldn't travel. But Peter Jackson said that he put his all into the performance, and it was a touching performance, and he knew it was his last performance at that stage. So he really did put everything into it, knowing that this is probably the last thing he would work on. And I'm so glad that he did return to do that. I mean, I remember watching the Hobbit movie and thinking, as you said yourself earlier, you could tell he wasn't 100% there. He was struggling against the disease, but nevertheless, even though that was happening, he was still pushing through, determined to give as much as he could. And it's still a fantastic performance that he reprises, as he's not in.
And after his opening, the movie terrible.
And but that was his swan song. That was the last big performance he gave. And we have that forever, and I'm glad we do. And it's such an amazing man, who one of the best actors we'll ever have. The National Theatre tweeted, "I'm very sad to hear that Ian Holm has passed away. He was an extraordinary actor, and we have wonderful memories of his performance at the National Theatre as King Lear." Those performances were among the finest ever of that time. And also BAFTA have tweeted saying, "We are very sorry to hear the death of Ian Holm, nominated for 6 BAFTAs in his wide-ranging and successful career across TV and film." And there's a picture of him there winning the Supporting Actor Award for his role in Chariots of Fire, 1981. So yeah, the Royal Shakespeare Company, Gregory Doran said, "It's with great sadness that we heard today the death of Sir Ian Holm. Ian was quite simply one of the RSC greats. Long before he found fame in Chariots of Fire, Alien, Greystoke was Bilbo Baggins, Lord of the Rings. Ian joined the Stratford Company in 1958. So he'd been an actor for quite a long time before he got famous through his role in Alien." He says, "Ian perfectly expressed the cross-fertilization between classics and new writing that Peter Hill forged in the early days of the RSC. He married the technique of a classical Shakespeare actor and the intense naturalism and economy of style of a modern tradition. Ian was entirely original, entirely a one-off. He was a simmering cool, a compressed volcanic sense of ferocity." That's a quite good way to put it. "Of danger, a pressure cooker actor, a rare and magnificent talent. There's a great spirit gone." I think that puts it very, very bluntly, and but very, very aptly. I think you can't put it any other way than that, really. Other comments: "A charming, kind of ferociously talented. We will miss him hugely." But yeah, there's so many different things people have shared from different actors and directors, but a marvelous actor who I think will be deeply missed. But the good news is that we have this tremendous variety of movies that we can watch, and he's left that legacy for us, thankfully, thanks to the fact that we have these movie roles, these performances that will forever stay in cultural memory. So any last thoughts from yourself, Flash, about this actor?
He's on the white ships sailing to the west.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that's it really. Yeah, I won't quote Gandalf. There's a last quote from Gandalf, isn't there, at the end of that, at the end of Lord of the Rings, where it's, well, if they're tears, that because, you know, it's we remember him fondly, and although we've lost a great actor, he's like you say, he's headed into you know, cinema immortality. And
I mean, just look at all that's left behind. All the, you know, performances are just like so good.
Yeah, and I think there'll be maybe a lot of people who will go back and watch his work again now, and there's a whole generation of people, young kids and young adults, who might not be familiar with all of his work other than Bilbo, and they might go back and watch his other performances, because I think almost everybody's familiar with his performance as Bilbo. But
it makes you wish he'd actually played younger Bilbo.
Yeah, if that had been done quicker, then maybe that would have been possible. Because if they'd done Hobbit like maybe 2 years, even 3 years after the Lord of the Rings movies, then it would have still been possible, because he did do a short scene at the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring, didn't he?
He did the riddles in the cave scene.
Yeah. And I think if that had been possible, I'm not taking anything away from you know, the Hobbit movies, but
I think he was all the actors in those movies were good. The movies themselves are just terrible.
Yeah, I know there's a big controversy.
Never turned out good.
The overall feeling is that if they didn't have those actors who were really amazing, classically trained character actors, it wouldn't have worked at all.
I mean, like Martin Freeman, I couldn't think of another person that would have been more perfect.
I think he's the closest you can get.
Yeah, he's the closest to Ian Holm that you're going to get.
Yeah, you can't really. And I have to admit that the casting for the one person I didn't really think was cast well, or maybe he was cast well, but the performance wasn't directed well. I just don't like the way Aragorn was handled in those movies.
No, I hated that.
Did not work at all. And I think
the actor was fine, but yeah, they just changed him up to be self-defeating for 2 whole movies.
Yeah, he really doubts himself the whole way, and it's
and you know, he doesn't carry the sword, and you know, all the things that made him really cool in the book.
Yeah, I know he's
taken away, but I think they couldn't put those in because those were in the cartoon version.
Ah, I see. So there was like a copyright thing. Is that what you're saying?
It was partly the Hollywood thing. It's like you have to have the person with the, oh, I don't know if I can do it. Maybe if I try, and like, I won. You know, you got to have that Rocky thing.
Yeah, true.
I don't know if I can beat him. I don't know. Can I win the race? My bike isn't the best bike in town, but maybe I can win the race.
Yay, I did it.
Yeah. But it was also you couldn't have the epic scene where he, you know, meets the hobbits in the hotel room and pulls out the broken sword and proclaims who he is. As the rightful heir to the kingdom. And
no, true.
Because that was actually in the animated movie. So it's like, yeah, they couldn't do that.
So there was a number of things they just couldn't cover because of the copyright side of it. Ah, okay.
So there's a lot of key scenes that were either changed or they just couldn't do because of that.
All right.
Like I said, like the Legolas is introduced differently. In the book, he meets him at the river where the horse waves take out the Nazgul.
Well, he meets him in the woods by the river, doesn't he? I wondered why that was the case, because I was disappointed with the way that was structured. Because,
and then when he shows up, he's just kind of at the meeting.
Yeah,
he's like, oh yeah, that's the son of this guy. He's sitting over there. They don't really give him that introduction of the fact that he knew Aragorn for like years before that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a whole show in itself, isn't it?
But they gave all of Legolas's scenes to Liv Tyler.
Yeah, that was noticeable. But I'm glad that Bilbo's character wasn't meddled with too much, and
No,
his performance is, well, is it the best performance in the movie? I think it's between him and
Steam Bean.
It should be. Well, maybe. I think some people would disagree. I think
Orc number 3. My favorite was the slimy orc, or maybe that was the second movie.
Right.
Not the steroid orcs, the white hand, but the slimy one that kidnaps the hobbits. Like he's my favorite, or the one with the rat face. He's great.
Yeah.
He's not in enough movies, though. I feel he should be in more things.
Well, I think most people would say it's between. I agree, there's some fantastic performance, but I was thinking more of throughout the entire 3 movies, and I think most people would go for Andy Serkis, but Ian McKellen, they'd go for Ian McKellen, or they'd probably might go for. I'm not sure too many people go for Sean Bean, but yeah, I think overall in the top 3 has to be Ian Holm for me anyway. As a, he's not in all 3 movies though, is he? He's in the first one and the third one. But then again, so I think
everybody did a good job. Well, you know who really overlooked in those movies is Rudy.
Right.
Sam.
Yeah, well, he's the real hero of the story, isn't he?
Yeah.
Sam Gamgee. People
you know
what's
funny is I know like kids that watch those movies now.
Yeah.
It's like their favorite character is Sam.
Yeah, because he's the everyman.
Like again, people watching it with fresh eyes, without all the hype or all the publicity. They're like, oh, we love Sam.
Yeah. This is it, because he is really the down to earth man who's, and that was because I didn't realize that at first myself. I used to think the hero was Frodo, and then I realized, well, hang on, it's actually Sam who's the real hero.
You really don't get that until the very end.
Yeah, because he's the only character left, isn't it? I mean, I wasn't gonna do this, but you forced my hand now, so I'm very gonna quickly read the last paragraph of the last book of the Lord of the Rings, and we'll finish there. But Sam was now sorrowful of heart, and it seemed to him that if the parting would be bitter, more grievous still would be the long road home alone. But even as they stood there, and the elves were going aboard, and all was being made ready to depart, up rode Merry and Pippin in great haste, and amid his tears Pippin laughed. "You tried to give us the slip once before and failed, Frodo," he said. "This time you have nearly succeeded, but you fail again. It was not Sam, though, that gave you away this time, but Gandalf himself." "Yes," said Gandalf, "for it will be better to ride back 3 together than 1 alone." Well, here at last, dear friends, on the shores of the sea, comes the end of our fellowship in Middle-earth. Go in peace. I will not say, do not weep, for not all tears are an evil. Then Frodo kissed Merry and Pippin, and last of all Sam, and went aboard, and the sails were drawn up, and the wind blew, and slowly the ship slipped away down the long grey firth, and the light of the glass of Galadriel that Frodo bore glimmered and was lost. And the ship went out into the high sea and passed on into the west, until at last, on a night of rain, Frodo smelled a sweet fragrance on the air, and heard the sound of singing that came over the water. And then it seemed to him that, as in his dream in the house of Bombadil, the grey rain curtain turned all to silver glass and was rolled back, and he beheld white shores, and beyond them a far green country under a swift sunrise. But to Sam the evening deepened to darkness as he stood at the haven, and as he looked at the grey sea, he saw only a shadow on the waters that was soon lost in the west. There still he stood far into the night, hearing only the sigh and murmur of the waves on the shores of Middle-earth, and the sound of them sank deep into his heart. Beside him stood Merry and Pippin, and they were silent. At last the three companions turned away, and never again looking back, they rode slowly homewards. And they spoke no word to one another until they came back to the Shire. But each had great comfort in his friends on the long grey road. At last they rode over the downs and took the east road, and then Merry and Pippin rode on to Buckland. And already they were singing again as they went. But Sam turned to Bywater, and so came back up the hill, as the day was ending once more. And he went on, and there was a yellow light and a fire within, and the evening meal was ready, and he was expected. And Rose drew him in, and set him in his chair, and put little Eleanor upon his lap. He drew a deep breath. "Well, I'm back," he said. And on that note, thank you to everybody who's tuned in tonight, everybody who watched this recording. And again, thank you to Erodimus Flash, who joined me tonight for this special show. In honour of Sir Ian Holm, a great actor who will be greatly missed. Good night, everyone.
Good night.